very good at being efficient. But first, obviously, I want to thank my mom and Eli's parents. My mom judges every weekend, probably more rounds than we end up debating, at least most weekends. And I'm really thankful for that because we don't have other judges other than Eli's parents, I'm also thanking. And so we couldn't do this without her. And also, she usually allows me to have a very low GPA because I'm debating. So it was a 1.21 the last time I gave this speech, but it's a 1.64 now. So hopefully that's satisfactory. For Eli's parents, Andrew and Julie, especially Andrew, I'm really glad you convinced Eli and I to do national debate at the very end of our sophomore year, and for getting us into all the tournaments that won't let us go because our administration doesn't help us. Hopefully we've made your work worthwhile, and hopefully Eli and I can debate in the same house again soon so I can enjoy Julie, Eli's mom's cooking. Then to Cayman, you don't get a thank you. Then first to Nathaniel, who's just always bullies me and will probably drop me this round, keeps me humble. Then to Zainal Kaisi from Hawken. He taught me everything I know about debate at camp and then throughout the year. And I'm sorry we didn't get the TOC finals round we wanted to, but we were pretty close. Not really. And then to Siva Sambasivam, who's given me immeasurable opportunities and advice in coaching our kiddos. Then second to last to Zoe Spicer for pulling out of the tournament. Made it easier to win. And then to my partner, Eli, most of all. Once upon a time, we partnered because our school had no program and there was no one else. But now we partner because COD Zombies is the most fun I've ever had.
Still different.
And yeah, I'm glad we've reconciled our differences and actually used prep time to talk about arguments instead of why your hairline is bad. With that, is everyone good? Cool. Eli and I affirm contention 1 is global freedom. Democracies in free fall all over the world. Brute 20 of Washington Post explains democratic erosion is now the norm across the world as 2019 saw the 14th year in a row of political deterioration, with 64 countries experiencing a loss of liberty. Since 2009, the U.S. has fallen 8 points on Freedom House's 100-point scale, and there is a real danger that countries such as India, the U.S., and Israel may be going down the same road that Hungary and Poland traveled. This is a direct result of surveillance. As Sinha 14 of Human Rights Watch explains, the current indiscriminate U.S. approach to surveillance carries enormous costs. It erodes global digital privacy and sets a terrible example for other countries. U.S. surveillance programs also damage freedoms of expression and association, press freedom, and the right to counsel, which are all protected by the Constitution. Affirming and ending this surveillance allows the U.S. to pressure other nations to take similar measures, taking a key step in the right direction. Absent such measures, global surveillance will produce global autocracy. There are 2 reasons. First, Shinan 15 to Surveil explains, surveillance inevitably leads to authoritarian government. Surveillance makes people more tolerant of authoritarian uses of state power. It encourages governments to see and treat people as mere conscripts to their purposes. Second, Haggerty 15 of the University of Alberta writes, NSA security surveillance infrastructure puts us on the verge of turnkey totalitarianism. 20th century examples of repressive uses of surveillance were relying on surveillance infrastructures that today seem laughably rudimentary. Surveillance capacity gives organizations unprecedented abilities to manipulate human behaviors, desires, and subjectivities towards organizational ends. The impact of authoritarianism is mass murder. As Rumble 94 of the University of Hawaii writes, the more power a government has, the more it can act arbitrarily according to the whims and desires of the elite. Totalitarian governments slaughter their people by the tens of millions, while many democracies can barely bring themselves to execute even serial murders. Contention 2 is drone violence. Ending surveillance at home would also prevent invasive and destructive NSA operations abroad. As ProPublica 13 explains, because there is no reliable way to separate domestic from international communications, programs also capture purely domestic internet activity. Thus, the only way to avoid obtaining any domestic information at all would be to shut down operations altogether. This is key, as Eversley 13 of USA Today writes, drone campaigns of the CIA depend heavily on the ability of the NSA to sweep up information from emails and other pieces of signals intelligence. Byford 14 of The Verge confirms the US military and CIA use the NSA's metadata analysis to identify airstrike targets without confirming their veracity on the ground, as they can't. Drone violence causes civil war in 2 ways. First is weakening states. Boyle 13 of International Affairs explains, drone attacks have lasting political effects that can weaken existing governments, undermine their legitimacy, and add to the ranks of their enemies. The popular perception that a government is powerless to stop drone attacks on its territory can be crippling to the incumbent regime and can embolden its domestic rivals to challenge it through violence. Second is terror. Boyle continues that following the escalation of drone strikes in Yemen, the desire for revenge drove thousands of Yemeni tribesmen to join al-Qaeda, as well as smaller militant networks. Mahmoud 19 of the Institute of Labor Economics confirms 1 drone strike causes over 4 additional terrorist attacks per day, as the general populace increasingly turns to anti-US and radical expressions after drone strikes. This is devastating, as Lioe to the University of Iowa explains, of 559 terrorist groups, 12% escalated their use of force to a civil war as groups weaken the state, creating greater opportunities for insurgency. Civil war is devastating, as Stanford 16 terminalizes, civil wars lead to state fragmentation and the possibility of transnational groups getting involved. Civil wars result in enormous civilian casualties, large-scale refugee flows, and huge pressure on neighboring states. Contention 3 is 0 days. Drolet 16 of the CSO explains that the NSA is withholding zero-day exploits for their own use in spying specifically. This practice is extremely dangerous, as these zero-day vulnerabilities can be exploited by any knowledgeable attacker, not just the NSA. In fact, Hare 17 of the Harvard Belfer Center finds the rediscovery of vulnerabilities kept secret by the US government is the source of up to 1/3 of all vulnerabilities in use each year. These 0 days created and kept secret by the NSA are what enables the hacking of businesses. Osborne and Heat of ZDNet writes, 76% of successful cyber attacks leverage 0 days, making them 4 times more likely to succeed. Voting pro NC justification behind NSA stockpiling of these vulnerabilities, but the US would still find and patch them. As Bogert 17 of RAND confirms, stockpiling may be beneficial for those offensively focused. However, defenders will always be vulnerable to 0 day vulnerabilities and will want to disclose and patch them upon discovery. This is key, as US-enabled cyber attacks hurt millions annually. Cybersecurity Ventures 20 explains, global cybercrime costs will grow by 15% over the next 5 years, reaching 10.5 trillion US dollars annually by 2025, up from 3 trillion in 2015, amounting to over 10% of global GDP. Due to lower demand for goods, Sanchez, while the St. Louis Fed terminalizes a 1% decrease in GDP, has been associated with a 2% increase in the 2 percentage point increase in the unemployment rate, forcing millions into structural and abject poverty. Thus we affirm.
Do you want to send all of the evidence in the email chain, or do you want me to call for specific cards?
I can just send all of it.
Yeah.
Cool.
Roy,
We'll
do
do
you
that
want me to
too.
do it, or do you have it?
Yeah, it's sent. Wait, my email's taking a second to open. Eli, get it. I have the spinny beach ball.
Okay, yeah, I'll do it.
Oh wait, no, we're good. Cool.
Okay, got it.
Okay, it is replied all as of now.
All right, I can start once we've got it. All right, we got it. The F should be sent as well. It's just in a Word doc. Hopefully that's okay. Okay, it's in. So I'll also do some thank yous. First, I would like to thank Maddie, our coach. She's great and has helped us get a lot better. Second, thanks to Bryce Petrowski, the original OG of Lakeville Debate, made us into what we are now, and to Lillian for judging for us this weekend and sticking around on the Zoom, helping us prep progressive arguments. Thanks to Marco and Tejas for sticking around all weekend, watching our rounds. They're really great debaters and are going to be super good next year. And we really appreciate you helping us prep and everything. I would like to thank my parents for funding my endeavors and always being supportive and helping me out. And lastly, I would like to thank Henry. There's no one I would rather spend hours in Discord calls with, laughing at like Smash Bros memes and stuff. I don't know. So yeah, thanks for joining the debate with me. All right, is anyone not ready? Okay, then I'll begin. We negate in contention 1 is cyber defense. Domestic NSA surveillance regularly scans communications to identify weaknesses. As Goldsmith 13 explains, relentless assaults on America's networks by hackers and criminals have created an urgent need for safeguards. To keep our networks secure, the government will need to monitor and collect intelligence on these networks. Having government computers scan internet communications can block or degrade the attacker exploitation, allow it to discern patterns of malicious activity, and enable the government to trace back an attacker's identity and geographic origin. These processes have empirically stopped attacks. As Whitaker 20 explains, the NSA is open about the vulnerabilities it finds and has shared a number with private companies, which could have allowed hackers to run malware. The first impact is coronavirus. Domestic surveillance is critical to sustaining rapid vaccine development and distribution. As Whitaker 20 explains, the NSA is working to protect efforts to produce and distribute a vaccine, which is the only long-term way to end the pandemic. Actors are seeking to disrupt vaccine information or shake confidence. This is essential as development is not over. Cone 20 explains many more months of testing will be required before vaccines can be deemed effective. The most ideal vaccine will not require freezing and will only require one dose. Every small delay is devastating. As Reuters 20 explains, about 5,400 people are dying around the world from COVID-19 every 24 hours. The second impact is a meltdown. Cyber attacks have deliberately targeted nuclear power plants, as Stellan 18 explains. Cyber attacks aimed at U.S. nuclear power plants suggest that Russia infiltrated the nuclear plant, but not the control systems. Any type of attack on a nuclear plant could have very serious consequences, including radiation, core damage, and radiation. A meltdown would be horrific. As Lemon 11 explains, under core meltdown, the entire region and beyond will be threatened with permanent contamination. Chernobyl killed nearly 1 million people worldwide from radiation. If the cooling systems fail, superheated fuel rods will melt and thousands will die, potentially millions. The third impact is the economy. Threats of cyber attacks on businesses and financial markets are extremely high, with Basani 18 explaining, cybersecurity threats have become the most important threat to financial stability. A large-scale incident could disrupt the operations of financial companies and markets and threaten the broader economy. This could lead to a recession, which would be devastating. As Evans 09 explains, the 2008 global recession pushed 90 million people into extreme poverty. Contention 2 is foreign data centers. NSA surveillance has boosted the development of data centers abroad in 2 ways. The first is offshoring. DNS 13 explains US companies are seeking refuge overseas to protect their data. Silicon Valley is not immune to the revelations about widespread surveillance by the NSA. Indeed, damaging information about NSA's tactics is spurring an IT renaissance in several countries. For instance, Brazil and India citizens as well as companies are unnerved about the revelations about spying. The second is a shift to foreign companies. Miller 14 explains tech companies abroad from Europe to South America are gaining customers that are shunning United States providers suspicious of the National Security Agency surveillance, despite the tech companies' assertions that the perception that they enabled spying has lingered. This movement out of the US has continued to today, as Ang 20 explains. Growth in cloud services is showing no signs of slowing down yet. By 2025, the US portion of public cloud storage will drop from 51% to 31%. Due to the cost of keeping data stored outside the US, companies have every reason to come back if surveillance ends, as DNS 13 contextualizes. The Valley is bracing for losses in the range of $35 billion in annual revenues because of seeking storage of their data elsewhere. The impact of companies exiting emerging markets is delaying the recovery of the pandemic. Despite the general economy tanking, data centers continue to be a reliable source of growth. As Miller 20 explains, the world's largest investors are focusing on the market for digital infrastructure. Interest remains high even amid the COVID-19 crisis. Interest in data centers has been boosted by the growth of AI and 5G. This has become the most important force in economic sustainability, as Stevenson 20 explains. For governments to drive economic recovery after the pandemic, supporting digital FDI can bring technology, know-how, jobs, and growth. FDI is the largest source of finance for developing economies. Any delay to recovery is devastating, as the World Bank in 2020 explains the pandemic is estimated to push an additional 88 billion people into extreme poverty every year. To reverse this, countries will need to prepare for capital and innovation to resume growth. Thus, we negate.
Good for Cross.
Yeah.
Cool. First card in case. Goldsmith. Who's it citing? Like not the Goldsmith person, but who are your quotes from?
The Goldsmith evidence.
Mhm.
I'm not sure. I'm sure you can tell me.
So everything you cut, every single word that's cut, not the overall article, but every word you cut is from General Keith Alexander. What's his role? Do you know?
I mean, I'm sure he like heads the NSA.
He heads the NSA. So your card says that the head of the NSA thinks the head of the NSA does a really great job protecting everybody.
Yep.
Do you see why that's problematic?
I mean, I'm sure he's head of the NSA because he has a lot of other qualifications as well. Like, I
Well,
don't
he's
think
head-
we should immediately discount his warrants because he's the head of the
But he doesn't
NSA.
give warrants. He says that NSA surveillance is great because it stops attacks. There's no reason or
No,
technical
the warrant is that it can
block.
block or degrade the attacker exploitation because we scan internet communications.
So because we scan internet communications and block hacks, we can block hacks and scan internet communications. There's no reason
What?
technically or electronically or cyber securitizationally as to why that works.
We scan communications, which
Right.
can then block the attack because we know where it's
How?
coming from, like we know what they're targeting. Because if we scan a communication and they said we're hacking this, I'm this person, like we know who they're like what they're hacking
Your
and like
argument
who
is
they
that
are.
the NSA scans every communication at all times, finds the attack, and then stops the attack.
I mean, not every communication at every time,
Then how do they
like
find
all
it?
times, obviously, but like still like trillions of bits of information flow through the NSA every day.
What system is Keith talking about? What's the name of the NSA's cybersecurity?
The metadata program.
No, what's the actual name?
I mean, I don't know. Like, I'm sure you can tell me. I guess I don't know the technical name.
3. And so Einstein 3 scans what? Your evidence says it scans internet communications, private or
Yeah.
public.
I'm guessing both. I don't know. I'm sure you can
No,
tell me.
it's not allowed to scan both, because if the NSA could scan everyone's communications at all time, that would violate pretty much 7 of the 10
I mean,
things.
I think the NSA is like pretty okay to like violate whatever norms they want. But can I have a question now?
They don't, which is why.
Can I have
most
a
people don't
question?
Go for
Sure.
it.
Okay. So on your on your drone attack argument, right? So you say that we like have to stop foreign surveillance. So why can't the NSA, like under the resolution, just throw out any foreign surveillance it gets?
Throw out any foreign surveillance.
Yeah, like why can't it
mean
just
any
refuse to
domestic
look at it?
Wait. So
Oh yeah, domestic surveillance. Like why can't we just throw out domestic surveillance if we
if the
accidentally collect it?
resolution says I can't pick up your apple, and then I pick up your apple and throw it in the trash, I still picked up your apple, right? Like they're still surveilling people even if they get rid of the surveillance afterwards. And also, probably the regulation that does fiat wouldn't say like the NSA just has to throw the data away, because there's no way to verify that unless you go through every piece of data the NSA collected, right? It's much more likely that they'd actually just not be allowed to collect it for our warrants.
Right.
Can I take a question?
Sure.
Okay, your piece of evidence, this is the NSA is protecting the COVID thingies. It says cybersecurity, and the line says, and I quote, ensuring the cybersecurity of the government agencies tasked with approving a vaccine is a priority. Does it talk about the cybersecurity of the vaccine makers, or does it talk about identifying foreign threats?
Yeah, it's talking about like protecting and the FDA
Right,
and
so
the
when-
people who like distribute the
So when
vaccine.
General
Right?
Keith Alexander went on an interview and then talked about what the NSA is doing to protect the vaccine, did he say it was cybersecurity or that they were researching which Russians were trying to like blow us up?
We're over time, but I'm sure you can tell me.
The latter.
We'll take some prep. Roy, call me.
Okay. I gotta use my brother's phone. Give me a second.
Yeah, you're good. Starting now. Alrighty, that was 46 seconds. So yeah, I have some thank yous too, just before we get started. First of all, I want to thank Strake for putting on a great tournament this year. It was a lot of fun and has run really smoothly. And I want to give a special shout out to RJ Shaw for taking the time to tab the tournament. RJ has been a really good friend to me, starting from when he and Caden taught me how to debate at NSD way back when, 2 years ago. And then he showed me around the campus when I visited Duke last year, and he's always super helpful when I have random debate questions. So I really appreciate everything he's done for both this tournament and me personally. Then I want to thank my parents for everything that they do to make it possible for us to be here today, whether it's financial or emotional. Their support is really helpful, and I love them both. I'd especially like to thank my dad for, again, he helps make BCC's travel team possible this year and has worked with a really non-compliant administration, so I appreciate that. Next, some debate friends. So I want to thank Anisha and Abiram from Edgemont, Zach and Ben from Hackley, Anthony and Jeremiah from Summit, Zane and Grant from Hawken, Nathaniel and Chaz from Oakton, and Ishan, Ben, Simon, Strake, Ali, and Cooper, and Caden, Simon, Ali, Cooper, and Caden from Strake. Y'all are all great friends, and you've helped teach me so much about the activity and so much about the community. And also Brian and Vinayak from Lambert. Then our coach, Cayman, you're the smartest, funniest, and wittiest person I've ever met. Ever since you started coaching us at Glenbrook last year when we were random kids from a school nobody had ever heard of, we've gotten astronomically better, and it's 100% because of you. Whether it's entertaining our brief forays into K-Lit, making fun of me and Roy's antics, or explaining the intricacies of each argument, every talk we have with you is really entertaining and enlightening. And lastly, Roy, you're the best debate partner I could ever ask for. You care really deeply about this activity and pour yourself into every part of it. Even when we have to learn how to respond to tricks at this tournament, which makes both of us kind of want to switch to Congress. Every tournament we go to is a new memory, whether it's you spilling food on every tie you own or failing to wake up in time for breakfast, which you did at this tournament too. I know that the best is yet to come, and I've really appreciated the time we've had together. All right, with that said, it's just going to be straight down their case. Everyone good? Alrighty, starting time now. On their first argument, their evidence is outdated because the kind of surveillance they're talking about is gone because bulk domestic telephony metadata collection under Section 215 of the Freedom Act expired in March of 2020 this year, which postdates all of their evidence. But second, our third contention solves because their link and their solvency is really nebulous and unclear. But we definitionally make it harder for these attacks to happen in the first place, because if they can't leverage 0 days, then they are literally 4 times less effective. Third, their evidence is from the general of the who directs the NSA and doesn't explain how the NSA is so effective. Prefer our empirics that millions of hacks are happening right now. Also, this guy lies all the time. Fourth, their evidence is talking about Einstein 3, which can only protect government systems and is also really ineffective. There's no solvency. But on their first impact, first, their link evidence says that the way the NSA is helping isn't through cyber defense, but through surveilling foreign actors to determine who is trying to do these attacks, which means they have no link. The only mention of cybersecurity is about protecting NSA cybersecurity, not these companies. Their evidence is really bad. But second, their offense is limited to not having to freeze a vaccine, as everything else has already been developed. They don't contextualize what this means, so you can't weigh it. But on the second impact, a couple problems. First is that there's no warrant as to why they can't just hack nuclear reactors in places like New Zealand or Africa or Europe, which don't have the NSA. But second, Kalen 16 explains that because of backups, analog systems, and technical barriers, hacks of nuclear reactors are next to impossible. If it is not on the internet, like most of these things aren't for security reasons, because the impact disproves the link, then they literally can't hack it. There is no way this is going to happen. It's super improbable. On the third, also, they don't provide any actor analysis of who would want to do this or why. If nuclear meltdowns are so bad, there's no reason any state or non-state actor would want to do this because, on the third impact, there's no warrant as to why they can't just hack the economic sectors of other countries again, and attacks in the status quo are decreasing GDP by more than enough to put us in a perpetual state of recession, so they don't actually solve anything. But on their second argument, at the top, all of their evidence is from 2013 and about immediate reactions to the NSA. People are no longer as concerned about it and don't worry as much because of the USA Freedom Act, which was passed in 2015, which curtails the NSA a lot and allows for more FISA oversight. Also, their link is perceptual, and the NSA has ended most of surveillance as of March this year, so their link should have been triggered. But then their ONG 20 evidence doesn't mention the NSA once. It's not related. China and other nations are just investing more into cloud computing. But then there is also zero contextualization at all of what FDI does or how much it does. You can't weigh this argument. Also, FDI into foreign multinational cloud computing companies destroys domestic tech sectors and establishes monopolies, which hurts these companies. But specifically on their first link, a couple problems. First is that companies are actually experiencing growth because of NSA surveillance. Men 13 writes that small US companies are seeing a jump in business overseas, along with an uptick in sales domestically, because they're making more money selling encryption and cybersecurity related services to block out the NSA. But second, bigger corporations are, never mind. On the second link, it's non-unique because consumers are at risk of Chinese and Russian espionage everywhere. There's no reason why people dislike American surveillance more, but then these companies also directly surveil people like Facebook. There's no reason why NSA surveillance uniquely triggers this. If people use Facebook, obviously surveillance isn't that much of a priority for them. Their arguments are super unclear, they're super uncontextual, and there are a lot of problems with their link chain that makes it unclear what their surveillance, what their solvency is. We say you should vote on contextualized arguments because your ballot should be looking to things that you actually know the cause and effect and actually know how many people you're helping. Our case is super, super specific, and we actually identify our scope of solvency, which is a reason to always vote AF.
We'll run prep.
Roy, call me.
Can I call for a piece of evidence? It's the first piece of evidence that you read at the top,
And we
and
stopped.
also the men evidence. We'll like stop prep.
Yeah, we stopped prep. That was minute 30 there.
The first piece of evidence I read at the top.
Yeah. The March 20 evidence.
I will grab that. Roy, you get.
Men was that
Yep.
they're seeing a jump in business overseas.
Yeah.
The reason Eli stopped reading that is because we realized we don't actually have the card and we borrowed it from an email chain, so you can scratch that off your flow.
Oh.
I
So
think.
we're
Unless
striking
I might
men.
be able to get it from the email chain. Give me
The
one.
like men turn about selling
Yeah.
encryption.
The reason we
sounds
stopped reading is because we were like, I was like, Eli, we don't have that.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
So, all right.
Striking that from the flow then? Or
Yeah.
just
Please do. Yeah, the men turns.
Sorry, give me 1 second to just pull up these cards. Okay. Yep, I have them. Whoopsie. Alrighty, they're sent about section 215 expiring.
All right, we'll wait for it to come and then we'll resume prep.
Alrighty, just to confirm, how much was that?
It was a minute 30 before.
Alrighty, sounds good.
All right, we will resume prep.
We're resuming prep, just so Okay. Is everyone ready?
That was 215 total.
It's going to be down our case, their side. Gotta mute myself. Okay. Oh, thank you. Thanks, Maddie and Bryce, my coaches and previous coaches, for helping prep us all out all weekend and being like the best coaches that you could possibly be. Thanks, Strake, for coaching. Lillian, our judge, for judging for us all weekend. This tournament has been super wacky, so thank you for dealing with whack stuff. I wish you could be in this great substance roundup about to have. Thank you, Marco and Tejas, for sticking around all weekend and like hanging out with us and being supportive. Thank you for my parents for being supportive and making me eat like crackers and chips all day and Gus for getting me to join this crazy activity. I would have never joined if you hadn't convinced me to. So thank you. With that, it's going to be my case, their case. On their first response, they say our evidence is outdated and that a bill has been passed. First off, the NSA will always find reasons to justify even if the bill is happening. Second, we can post in them. Gossisis writes in May of 2020 that the NSA is now providing context about the vulnerability that is highly helpful for mitigating efforts. In January, the directorate announced a Microsoft vulnerability to the company instead of using it to carry out activities of its own. That also solves for all of their 0 days arguments, because while the NSA in the past might have been keeping the programs, the vulnerabilities for themselves, now they're giving them to the company so that they can patch the vulnerabilities. Then they say that it's from a general. However, Microsoft confirmed that they are using the software to patch their vulnerabilities, and the general is still highly qualified, and there have also been multiple news outlets that have confirmed these things. They talk about Einstein 3. First, our evidence indicates that the NSA can scan for communications. Second, our evidence doesn't talk about Einstein 3 whatsoever. And third, the nuclear systems impact doesn't have this because nuclear systems are owned by government, not private corporations. On nuclear systems, they say why it's not other companies. However, we specifically stop the cyber attacks that people are actively trying to do against nuclear corporations. Then they say that nukes aren't online. There's no evidence for this. Our evidence indicates that they've already been infiltrated, but they've been they haven't been able to actually do attacks. Literally, countries are actively trying to get on them and have been successful in the past, which is why it's super important to get these patches online. Then they say who wants to attack these, terrorists, North Korea, anyone who hates the United States. On the econ argument, they say that we're trending to it now. We'll get to it on their side, but remember that a big attack hasn't happened, which is what uniquely triggers a financial collapse. On data centers, they say that people don't care because of oversight, that this evidence is only about phones. The government still surveils the internet. Then they say that the link should have already been triggered. It's a scalar impact. Some amount of the offshoring is due to surveillance. Then they say it's non-unique with social media, but social media is just collecting info for ads. It's not like the government who could arrest you or kill you. Then they say that there's scope of solvency. There's no context as to what that weighing mechanism means. It's super nebulous. Go to their side. On the first argument about global freedom, first, the argument is reliant on other countries modeling the US because like the US would never commit mass murder, even though we've had like situations in the past. Cultural differences mean that the countries no longer model after the US. Horowitz 12 writes that America no longer holds weight in emerging democracies. The Constitution may not neatly fit into other countries' models of society. Democracy cannot be imposed from the outside. Second, it's empirically false. Edgar 15. In 2013, Obama made significant reform for domestic NSA surveillance, but foreign leaders have taken few steps to limit surveillance and none have done anything remotely comparable to what Obama did. On their mass murder impact, first, aren't impacts to poverty and like all of our impact scenarios about like devastation link in? Collapses 14 writes that economic crises push people to their limits and make them more susceptible to demagoguery and populism. Extreme economic situations facilitate extreme political leaning. Second, there's no statistical correlation between oppression and democracy. Tinnerman 12 finds that in measures of civil war and military control, democracy does not affect the levels of repression. Using India as an example, prefer because it's multiple studies and empirical examples on drones. First, they say that we need to stop foreign surveillance. First, this is only true for foreign actors with people in the US. Second, we can just do surveillance on the output from international actors, which ensures we don't intercept US data. Third, over time, the NSA will invest in AI technology to pick out foreign actors. The second response is that drone strikes happen no matter what. Politicians need to flex their power and no one wants to put boots on the ground. That just means that drone strikes are less accurate, killing more civilians and causing more chaos. The third argument is another turn. If drone strikes decrease, that means more airstrikes and boots on the ground to compensate, triggering the same impact scenarios but more severe because it can be more attributed to the United States on 0 days. Non-unique. Adversaries can develop attack themselves. Gasula 17 writes that the low cost of computing means that adversaries don't need expensive weapons to pose a threat. Many are developing capabilities and already have the capabilities to disrupt infrastructure. Second, it's non-unique. Hackers can steal cyber weapons from the private sector. Heller 20 writes that sophisticated hackers have turned the tables on the world's cybersecurity forms, stealing digital schools with cyber espionage. The third argument is that our cyber operations and like the Gassili evidence that we read at the top of Rebuttal solves for like all of this. The NSA was doing this in the past, but aren't doing it in the status quo. Fourth, their impact is scalar, which is bad because it necessitates judge intervention to guess how big the impact is. We don't actually have like a quantification as to how this happens. You prefer the recession impact and like a big attack being stopped.
Okay, you good for cross?
Wait, I need some evidence. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Really quickly.
Yeah.
Sorry, can I see the 3 analytics on the first link on drones, like the foreign sector analysis, and that politicians will always do them? And then on your case, can I see the NSA provides context thingy, which is your first front line?
The everything on drones is analytics, just so you know.
Okay, can you send the rhetoric just because I like cut out for it?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, sure.
Thanks.
The last thing, the last thing wasn't typed out, but
That's fine. If you could, or I guess Eli can clarify it in cross then.
Yeah. On drones.
I just want to know.
there were the third response that isn't typed out. It was like if drone strikes decrease, that means more boots on the ground and airstrikes to
Yeah.
compensate for the drones.
What was the politicians warning? Just you can do it.
Okay.
Yeah.
I sent that. And then anything else? Oh, the frontline evidence? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, that's also sent.
Alrighty. Okay, Roy, let me know when you see it and then I'm good to start, Henry.
Okay.
Roy, you good? Okay. Alrighty. Oh, Henry, you're muted. Yeah.
Okay.
Solid. Alrighty. So about this drone strikes turn, your argument is without NSA surveillance, they get less accurate, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So why does NSA surveillance relate to like the accuracy of drone strikes?
So like, let's say I want to kill a terrorist leader in Yemen, right? And I'm doing that with a drone strike and they're sitting in a building. If I can do surveillance, I can know what building they're in. But like, if I'm not doing surveillance and I've just got like dudes on the ground who are like, we think he's like in this block, I can be like, okay, let's drone strike the entire block and like kill everyone there so we can kill this terrorist leader, right? Like, why wouldn't that happen?
Huh? Is that your question?
Okay, I'll take a question.
Yeah.
So you say that it's like non-unique with social media.
Yeah.
Are you as scared of like Mark Zuckerberg seeing like what like you're looking on at Facebook as you are like the government seeing?
I'm more scared of Mark Zuckerberg because there's no accountability.
What do you mean there's no accountability? Why is the government accountable?
Because I can call my congressperson and say, I don't like that this is happening, but I can't call
Right.
and
But
say-
like you say yourself that the NSA violates the Constitution. So why is there any sort of accountability to the NSA?
Look, well, no. The argument we're making is not like the argument we're making is more broad, right? It's just that people do not care enough to like do what you're saying they'll do, right? Because they're being surveilled no matter what.
Then why do but there is a difference between being surveilled by Facebook and being surveilled by your government, isn't there? Like the two are not the same.
Why are okay, but like so then what do people care about? Like in your
People
case?
care about like not being accused of crimes that they may have been committed, or being like on government databases that will like lower their credit score, like make it harder for them to get a job because they're like on some wait list because they're like a suspected terrorist or something.
Okay.
Do you have a question?
I think Roy will backline that in summary. Yeah. Alrighty. So let's talk about our C3 or my C3. Sorry. So you say hackers can steal cyber weapons from companies. What companies have stockpiles of cyber weapons? That can
FireEye. Like there was literally an attack yesterday that was used using FireEye's stolen vulnerabilities. FireEye is a private corporation that finds cyber vulnerabilities in the same way that the NSA does,
All right.
except it finds them and
So
exploits them and like
does
sells them to
FireEye
companies.
find anywhere close to the number of vulnerabilities the NSA finds?
I mean, if you have evidence saying like the NSA finds way more surveillance, but like
we do.
I-
The NSA
which
by
evidence is that?
itself, the NSA's non-disclosed vulnerabilities by itself account for 1/3 of all cyber attacks.
I mean,
Successful cyber
first off, that's a third, meaning that there's more from
have
other
evidence saying
sources.
that
But
FireEye
second,
is
that's the
accountable for
status quo,
2/3.
which not the future under the resolution.
Yeah, under the resolution, they patch all the vulnerabilities because they don't need to use them for spying anymore.
But then they just steal them from private corporations anyways. Like
But
obviously they're
private
getting them from the NSA now, but if they're not going to get them from the NSA, they'll get them from private companies.
Okay, why can't the NSA have the same vulnerabilities?
That's
Oh, we're out.
gross.
My bad. Alrighty. Roy, call me.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, just had to find my way back to Zoom. Cool. Wait, actually, really quickly before I do that, what was your? Can you send your response to the turn on your C2 about FDI bad, or was it just conceding a D-link? My audio was like horrible during your speech for some reason. Henry.
I'm pretty sure we outweighed.
Okay.
Like, which turn was this?
Your entire C2.
Where-
Okay,
where
I'll
was this?
then.
Okay.
Cool. Thanks. That was like 4 seconds of flex prep. I'm calling now. Cool. Their case, our case.
That was 47 more seconds, so we have one.
Oh, where's it starting?
Your C1.
remaining.
Yep. Our first response is that recently they've stopped collecting the metadata that their link relies on. They say two front lines. First, they say the NSA doesn't listen to rules. This is obviously not true. If they didn't, they would get indicted by the Supreme Court and the executive and everything else. And if it is true, that it means the resolution won't work, which means you probably presume AF because we're the first speaking team and they have a structural advantage and that they can like read, have more prep time before second rebuttal, but it's probably not true. Secondly, they say that they just disclosed a vulnerability, but they could have collected that vulnerability eons ago and they don't need the specific program to collect vulnerabilities. They can do that without it, which is why our 3 is still true. So you know that they don't do the collection that's reliant for their link, so they have no offense. The next thing to extend is that their author is literally the NSA director. They say news outlets verify the quote or verify the source. No, they just quote the guy. They don't verify that what he's saying is true. And they have no means to. They don't know what the NSA does. They've considered the empiric that A, he lies all of the time about how well and how effective he is because he knows his surveillance agency is only able to collect that surveillance if he's justifying it with lies. And B, they've considered the empiric that hacks are increasing right now and doing tons of damage, which means their argument definitely isn't true. Then on the impact he goes through about nuclear reactors, they've conceded they can just hack other countries, which means that there's no reason NSA is key, which is also the same response they concede on their argument about the economy. On FDI, they've conceded A, that there's literally no contextualization on how much help FDI brings, but they've also clean dropped a turn. The turn indicates specifically that FDI crowds out local businesses because it specifically goes to the cloud computing sectors that they talk about. It destroys all local tech in those countries, which means that when they inevitably return to the US, insofar as surveillance is decreasing the status quo, it nukes their entire tech sector, destroys their economy, and keeps them perpetually trapped in the recession. It's dropped it out with every other argument on the flaw and strength of link. It's going to be very difficult to resolve any of their offense, especially considering how many responses we got on their C1. So you should probably vote here to avoid intervention. On our case, on C1, we're not going for modeling. We're going for the U.S. specific argument. They say that the U.S. would never commit mass murder. There's no warrant for this, and they've conceded the empiric that every single year our freedom score and our civil liberties and everything else is declining. And with every president, turnkey totalitarianism because of the surveillance state, we easily could, and they easily could oppress us. So insofar as our liberties are declining and they have no warrant, you probably believe that the U.S. could do it. At that point, extend the argument. Surveillance reduces people's or makes people more tolerant of losing other liberties because they know they're already losing privacy and so forth. And surveillance gives the government the infrastructure it needs to do the kind of oppression when the elites inevitably take over. They say that it doesn't correspond between oppression and democracy, but this is obviously not true. They've conceded multiple warrants as to why, even if it's not about democracy, our argument is still true that insofar as liberties are decreasing right now and they're listening to the elites more right now, then there's a higher risk of mass murder, killing millions of people. They say the economy links in, but this is definitely not true. There have been dozens of recessions since 1970 alone, and you haven't seen some mass increase in mass murder. Our link is unique. Also outweighs their case because it links you to death, which is irreversible, whereas life is, or you always get out of poverty. On C3, group all their arguments about how the low cost means about how they can do others. They've conceded that 1/3 of attacks come from the NSA, and they've conceded from Bogart that the NSA would still patch vulnerabilities, which means if you affirm, you solve private and public. Then they say that they used to not disclose them, but they've conceded that hacks are increasing the status quo right now. So yeah, maybe they disclose 1 or 2, but that's not anywhere near enough. And if their argument was true, then hacks would be going down. Their last response is that we don't have a quantification. Yes, we do. Every argument we read is empirical. At that point, extend the argument that right now the NSA uses vulnerabilities to spy on people, and they get reused by other countries, which hacks into 1/3 of all, or is 1/3 of all attacks every single year. But Bogart says we solve because they patch everything, which protects the global economy from $10.5 trillion in GDP, which is a bigger link to the economy than their case.
All right, we'll run prep.
Roy, call me.
All right, stop prep. That was like all of it, I think. All right, it's starting on the neg, then way, then go to the F. Is everyone ready? Cool. On the neg, we agree, like our guy is horrible. There's no link. Let's go to our C2 about data centers. Extend the DNS evidence. U.S. companies are leaving to go overseas because they want to hide from the NSA. That's conceded. They say it's not contextualized. What does that mean? We think the link is pretty clear. They leave because they want to get away from the United States. The Ang evidence backs this up by saying the U.S. portion of cloud service, the data service has dropped from 51% to 31%. That doesn't happen naturally. That happens because of huge shifts in the economy insofar as like large companies still control the majority of the market. Extend the DNS evidence. It costs $35 billion to host, which leads to losses in revenue. So if there's not afraid of the NSA, they have every reason to come back over to save their profit line. Extend the recovery evidence. The Miller evidence says that it brings in digital FDI, which helps the larger economy because, i.e., when countries have like tech revolutions, that helps productivity elsewhere, which brings in things like AI, 5G, which draws in investment and jobs and everything that Stephenson evidence talks about. The World Bank evidence is very explicit that there's 88 million people going into poverty right now. The only way to reverse this is investment and innovation. It's very explicit as to how digital FDI can solve. They say with this term that FDI crowds out domestic industries. We can outweigh this argument. Even if it was dropped, we can outweigh it. Even if FDI crowds out domestic tech sectors, our evidence is very explicit that it helps the economy broader because it causes tech revolutions, which cause productivity elsewhere, which is why FDI flows into every sector of the economy. Prefer the World Bank over their analysis. The World Bank says the way to reverse the poverty trend right now is to increase investment. We outweigh for two reasons. First, it's essentially conceded. There's absolutely no defense on the link of our argument, which means functionally, foreign companies come back to our side. Also, our argument is contextualized. There's no quantified number for mass murder on their side, which it sounds really, really bad, but there's no explanation for how, what that would look like. They say we don't have a link into lives. What happened? People go into poverty. They can't afford food and water, which means they die. It's pretty clear how poverty links into poverty. Also, we would say our argument is happening now. They've already left empirically, NSA surveillance has caused them to hide over there. All of their arguments are projections of what could happen in the future, or the NSA could do this and mass murder could happen, which is why we outweigh on probability on their side. First, we would say it's dumb to say, we don't think the US is going to commit mass murder. We're the democratic hegemon, which means we always have an incentive to uphold democratic norms. Also, we have the Supreme Court and stuff to make sure genocide never happens. But the most important response is the Tierman evidence just says that democracy and civil liberties have absolutely no effect on oppression. Our evidence cites specific examples, i.e. India is a democracy, but they commit really horrible, they're really oppressing people in Kyrgyzstan or in Kashmir, which they don't read an example. Ours is a metadata, is a meta study and cites examples of why liberty doesn't lead to an increased risk. We say mass murder happens in democracies. It's more tied to things like populism and hatred against a group than it is to government surveillance. Also, we outweigh because if this was true, we should have seen mass murder happening. It's obviously not happening. And on the C2, extend the Gazula evidence is basically conceded. They'll just get weapons from the private sector. They say that in the status quo, 1/3 comes from the NSA. That's only in the status quo. Their evidence does not explain what happens after the resolution is affirmed. We say if they can get access to weapons, no matter what, they're just going to get them and do it.
Alrighty.
Okay.
We used 144, so we have 216 left. I'm gonna call Roy.
Wait, are we doing 3 or could you?
RJ said it's 4 for elims.
Right, but they just said they were out and they only used 3, so we might as well only use 3 too for fairness.
I think it's fine to use 4.
we would be fine with an extra minute of prep before final. It's fine.
I think we're probably
Okay, we can use 3. We can use 3. That's
Okay, yeah.
but we have 116 left.
Okay.
Okay, Roy, call me because it goes straight to voicemail when I call you.
My brother's voice. Mine is octaves deeper than that. Don't bully me.
Not in the voicemail.
I hate you.
Wait. All right.
You didn't pick it up. Okay, starting now.
Alrighty. It'll be their case, our case. Everyone good? I'll signpost. All right. Starting time. Now, they have one piece of offense in the round, and it's their C2. We say it's uncontextualized because not a single piece of evidence that they read says how much FDI reaches these nations, how much it helps, or how many of the 80 million people they lift out of poverty, or anything else. You don't know what you're voting for. You don't know why you're voting for it, and you do not let them recontextualize this for the first time in second final. It is way too late. On the turn, they say FDI goes to every sector because the World Bank says investment is good, but investment is not FDI. That's why there's an FD in the front, and they've conceded that the FDI is specifically into cloud computing per their own link, which means they can't weigh any offense outside of the turn, and the turn is conceded, extended. FDI massively increases the strength of multinational cloud computing sectors, which destroys local technology industries and creates a single monopolies that let them raise their prices indefinitely, meaning they access no benefit people, are kept poor, and recessions are infinite. On the weighing, they say our arguments are projections, but trillions are being lost right now, and we outweigh on contextualization because every single one of our numbers is statistical, whereas they give none. We outweigh on scope because RC3 affects every country on Earth, and they only affect emerging markets. But we also outweigh on magnitude because there is zero chance they link into trillions of dollars of GDP worth of FBI. That is the biggest of the, so we outweigh in terms of like economic magnitude. On our case, they say they'll come from the private sector, but they've dropped two front lines. First is that no number of private sectors can create vulnerabilities for every single sector, so it's scalar. And the vulnerabilities the NSA discovers and keeps secret account for one third of all attacks, even though they can hack private companies right now. The second front line they drop is Roy's analysis from Bogart that the NSA will still seek out and disclose vulnerabilities under the AF because they're still vulnerable to them. So we solve the private sector as well. Also, they fundamentally misunderstand the point. What we tell you from Drolet is that the NSA uses and stockpiles these vulnerabilities and doesn't disclose them because they can use them on spying. Once you remove their ability to spy by voting AF and remove their incentive to spy, they want to disclose the vulnerabilities, which is empirically proven by Bogart that says that when they're defensive, they want to disclose and patch the vulnerabilities, which is really good because the vulnerabilities make attacks 4 times more likely and cost trillions and trillions of dollars in the status quo of GDP. And every shrink in GDP causes mass unemployment, which causes mass poverty. It's the cleanest impact in the round. It's the most contextual. There's no way to vote neg.
Okay. Is everyone ready? Oh, I'm going to mute myself. Okay. It's going to be my case weighing their case. Is everyone good? Okay. Extend our argument about offshoring. The DNS evidence finds that the fear of the NSA spying is causing companies to move their servers offshore, increasing their digital FDI. And the on evidence from 2020 finds that cloud storage abroad is increasing the status quo in 2020. And the DNS evidence finds that because this costs over $35 billion for these US corporations, if the NSA isn't surveilling, they'll move the servers back to the United States, which hurts these countries in the developing world. And the Miller evidence finds that this brings in digital FDI because investors want like 5G and other new cloud technologies, and digital FDI brings in technological revolutions for these countries because it attracts like more cloud computing because companies can like do more computing there. And the World Bank finds that 88 million people will be pulled out of the current recession if we can get them like out through the best method. They say that it's uncontextualized and how much FDI pulls people out. The Stevenson evidence is super good on this issue. It says that digital FDI is the best way to pull countries out of this situation because the digital revolution is like the only area of the economy that is still attracting investors in the status quo because it's not being hindered by the coronavirus because there's like new AI and 5G technologies. That's the best way to get out of the current recession the fastest. We outweigh on clarity of impact, quantified empirics, and magnitude because we say 88 million people are pulled out of poverty. They just say that they outweigh because it's trillions of dollars. But what does that mean? How many people are brought out of poverty? We are super specific. We on the turn. We outweigh the turn on scope. The Stevenson evidence is super good. It helps the broader economy with technological revolutions in the long term so that these small companies will attract more investors in the long term. We actually quantify the impact here, whereas they're like super nebulous and it doesn't actually help in the long term. On their side, extend the Kasula evidence. Hackers can always get weapons and vulnerabilities from the private sector and develop it themselves. They say that it can't create all of them, but it's already producing 2/3 of them. And they say that the NSA produces 1/3 of it now, but that's because it's the status quo. If hackers aren't getting it from the NSA, then that's when they pivot and start getting it from the private sector. They say they solve the private sector, but obviously it's not working now because like the private sector hacks are literally being used against like the government and corporations in the status quo.
Good round, y'all.
Yep, good round.
Good round.
Yeah, Roy, call me.
Like, it's not normal. I feel like everybody would prefer to be there in person. So, yeah, everybody just like pat yourself on the back, including spectators. Like, it's 11:15. It's about to be winter break, and you're watching debate rounds about like the national, like NSA. I don't even know what it stands for. Yeah, shout out to everybody for making this a good weekend. And yeah, Caden, if you want to say anything, you can hop in.
Okay, one thing to add to what RJ said is I don't think he praised himself enough. This is his, I think, 3rd year running, maybe organizing the Strake round robin almost exclusively by himself. I think he's really gotten it down to a science with his ever evolving ways to break brackets to do out rounds. It's gonna be different next year if any of y'all return. RJ's got some tricks up his sleeve. But RJ, you've done a great job this year. You've really outdone yourself. Keep it up, man.
Thank you, kid, and I love you.
Love you too, RJ.
BCC on the app. So, and Nathaniel, you were the squirrel. So if you want to go first.
Cool. So I voted for Lakeville in this round. I thought that this was a pretty difficult decision for me because a lot of the comparisons in this round were either late or kind of just saying that we won our case, so vote for us. So I'll start with the neg case. I think the extension's fine. Talking about the two responses that the AF gives. One is that it's uncontextualized. So I think that the problem with this is that it's kind of blown up a lot in the final focus. I hear a lot of new questions that are like how much FDI reaches, how much it helps, how many of these are lifted out of poverty, which were certainly on the summary who only said we don't know how much help FDI brings, which lets me grant what the app or what the neg says to interact with that, which I think was definitely the case that digital FDI is the best way to pull out of the particular situation their impact describes. So getting out of the 88 million from recession. So talking about the FDI turn, which is dropped, but I think the summary weighing is pretty solid against it, that the investment that FDI goes into will affect the entire economy compared to the destruction that maybe cloud computing might see if the US goes in. I think the app has a chance to recontextualize this because I don't really know if that weighing applies to what the neg argument is, or rather what the app turn is applying to the neg argument about, where the app talks about how FDI itself is bad. And I think the app final focus could be characterized that as even if other investment goes in, that is still bad for the economy. But the app just goes even harder on saying that it's only about cloud computing and that investment in cloud computing is bad, which I think gets beaten back by what the neg says more broadly about the economy being helped. So I'm granting the neg their offense, albeit a little bit mitigated by this turn, which is some like other direction of offense for the app to get, but mostly going for the neg on this part of the case. Talk about the app case. I think that the extension is a little bit rocky. Importantly, the extension of the impact is not there in the final focus, gets to it about 2 or 3, so didn't really go for that. But it is true that both of them are talking about the economy, so there's no real way to just drop all the offense. So the response we get from the neg is that the private sector can fill in. And I think the responses that the app gives are number one, that the private can't fill in from every sector. The NSA is 1/3 of attacks. I think the negs, 2/3 from the private sector is new in the final focus, but the point about the pivot is not interacted with by the app side. So I'm granting them that even if 1/3 is coming from the NSA, it's just a function of it being the status quo, where that could certainly be filled in by the private sector if we affirm. Second response, I think, is less interacted with by the neg side, where they say the private sector could just be sought out, like the NSA can still find these vulnerabilities and stop them, as the app advocate talks about. Yet I think this is just severely blown up between the summary and the final focus. Summaries are like 4 words saying we can patch private public like vulnerabilities, whereas the final focus talks a bunch about a card, which I don't remember hearing in the summary speech, and talking about how you can seek these out and destroy them, which is specifically applied to a response that the app just generally said group all theirs. So I feel pretty uncomfortable granting them this frontline, whereas I think the neg is still, and the neg is interacting with it while pointing out that it is working now. And even so, that frontline is still mitigation upon the fill-in argument, which is mitigation on what the app talks about. So then in terms of the weighing debate, where this debate should resolve because both sides are getting decent amounts of offense in their case, I don't really get a lot. I said already that both sides were talking about how our argument is very clear, which is kind of just asking the judge to vote for them because the judge likes their argument or something, who knows. Not really a direct comparison for one side or the other. We get 3 weighing mechanisms in the final focus, which I was pretty hesitant to vote off of, even if they are conceded by the neg, because I think the difference is, number one, the neg's weighing mechanism that they identify about how their argument has a direct connection between their links and their impacts, which is emphasized by the app not extending impact in their final focus, is consistent between their speeches, whereas these are introduced new in the final focus. And 2, they are introduced on the same layer of the debate, direct comparisons between each side's offensive argument or their main offensive argument, which still just lets me grant the neg offense, given that the app case is more heavily mitigated than what the neg case talks about. And so I vote neg.
My thank you speech was right, Nathaniel.
Yeah, so I mean, I guess in terms like the turn versus the emerging markets argument, I mean, I think like the neg probably won this. Or I mean, I'm still like not sure, but like, because what I'm getting from both sides is like, I think I'm more inclined to believe the neg because of this World Bank thing, because they have evidence behind it, and that's what they specifically said in like a certain speech about how if I wanted to adjudicate the claims that either that there's going to be an infinite recession or that there's going to be like a ton of growth. I could just look to the World Bank, and I guess that's true. So I guess I thus buy their case. So Neg gets access to their case. Then it's a matter of whether AF gets access to the case. But before I talk about that, I think if, in terms of talking about weighing, I think the main weighing that I get in Final Focus is just about like our argument is more clear from both sides, which is just like terrible. I don't know why both sides decided to collapse on that out of like everything else said in the round, because like both arguments are just like unclear. So I mean, I think I saw the FDI being uncontextualized response a little differently from Nathaniel, because I thought, at least like my interpretation of it was that it was specifically applied to this whole Brink analysis about like the 88 million people. It's not like, even if there's this 88 million people going into poverty as a result of the current recession, what the uncontextual FDI response was specifically, at least in like what I interpreted, which could have been like not right, but was that it wasn't really contextualized like how much of those people would be saved or how much of the recession would be less and stuff like that, which made like claims of contextualization non-unique for both sides. So I had to look at other weighing, which, or in terms of weighing, I would have to look at other weighing, and the only other weighing between the two arguments that I saw was in the summary, the AF summary, and it was like about scope, about how it like helped every country, not just like emerging markets. So that's the only other thing I found. I had to pull that back, but assuming if I did buy the AF contention, then that's what I would have to do, and that's the weighing that I would have to vote off of. So then, in terms of the AF case, I get this response saying, yeah, okay. I get this. I guess like the main defense on it is just like the private sector doing this. And there are like two front lines to this, as Nathaniel pointed out. I think there's first this 1/3 thing. I mean, I think the neg like response to this well, talking about how like 2/3, it'll just like the number will increase, or sorry, decrease. And it'll shift towards that other 2/3. So I think they're rebutting that point well. But I think the second front line that AF makes about like private and public, like NSA would be able to solve private and public as well. Like I agree that it's like a little blippy, but I didn't get a response from the neg on that. The only response I did get was in Final Focus, second Final Focus, saying that private sector hacks are being used in the status quo and stuff, which first I thought was new in second Final Focus, and two, like, I mean, if they had the opportunity to respond, it's probably because we haven't even done the app yet. I mean, it's less about that second thing, but more about the first thing. But which is why I think I'm more inclined to believe, like, I'm more inclined to give a link to them, even if it's like not like as good, even if like the private sector does like some stuff to fill in that gap, as long as I'm getting like some more attacks and like some sort of solvency and like the whole scalar stuff that they were talking about, I'm still more inclined to vote for them, because once again, contextualization is non-unique on both sides. I don't exactly know what either side is doing, because the Brink claim that the neg makes isn't as Af points out, not like isn't contextualized. So therefore I'm just forced to vote on the weighing mechanism that was in summary, the only other one in the round, which was just scope. So even if it does do little and it has a greater scope, that's the only thing I'm gonna like look at, because that's the only other thing brought in round.
Okay, so I saw it somewhat similar to Sai. One thing I'll just say to both the teams is like Nathaniel and Sai are both like, really smart people, and they both, made equally defensible interpretations of the round, and they came to different results. So I think that shows, all the debaters in the round that you could have definitely done a better job making it like clearer for your respective side. And so the first point I want to touch on is weighing. And so it's kind of similar to what Sai and Nathaniel said. Like, I don't think like any judge, like whether they're flow or lay, is going to vote for like contextualization weighing, or like just because your links clearly into your impact, or because you found like a card saying like 88 million people are going to fall into poverty from a recession, like that doesn't mean that like I'm going to vote for your argument over the other side's argument. So like none of the contextualization weighing like from Lakeville, at least I didn't find it like particularly convincing. So anyway, so just based on like who had a better link into their arguments. So like on Lakeville's case, I like didn't particularly like BCC's turn about like multinational corporations. I think it was like really underwarranted, and just in general, like analytical turns like that just like are not very good, at least in my opinion. But I also didn't really understand Lakeville's weighing about like how they outweigh on scope and how they affect the economy at large. I like don't get why they do affect the economy at large, but the turn doesn't affect the economy at large. And I also just like felt like neither side, like neither the AF's final focus nor the neg's final focus did a very good job like clearing that up for me. On the other hand, like while I don't think it was like that much cleaner than the other side, like I felt like AF did win 0 days. So I think I like evaluated this pretty similar to Sai. So like there's basically two responses. There's basically two responses to the AF in final focus. So one is like hackers will pivot to the private sector, and two, like it was like this just like one sentence, like it's like you were like it's clearly not working right now or something like that. So like the first response is not responded to that well in final focus, but both the first speaker and the second speaker on the AF say that the NSA will seek out and disclose vulnerabilities in the AF world. So that would solve back partially, at least for the private sector issue. And then the second response like was that like we should have seen this already in the status quo or something like that. Like, I don't know. I don't like responses like that in general. It was also new in final focus. And also, I just don't understand how that response functions logically, because we didn't do the AF yet. So obviously we like this wouldn't happen in the status quo. So yeah, man, I don't know. Like I just didn't like buy that response. And also, yeah, I was very hesitant to evaluate that because it was new and final. And so, yeah, so I think AF had a better link into 0 days than Neg had into like their C2. And so that's why I voted AF. And then, yeah, I don't know. The weighing debate was like really muddled. So I guess you could say that like since BCC did say scope weighing in summary, like that's the only like I don't know, like non like clarity of impact weighing. So that is like the clearest like I don't know, like weighing that I'm comfortable evaluating in the round. But I just think on the link level as well, BCC had a better link into their impact.
All right. Thanks for your comments and good round. It was really